So good morning everyone. Happy Easter. So before I start, given the news, Simon loved his football, so I wanted to start with a quote, sorry Rich, by Arsene Wenger. Christmas is important, but Easter is decisive. He was on about the football season, but it's also relevant to us. And also, if Chesterfield win tomorrow, Simon's a big Chesterfield fan, we'll be in the playoffs, and our opportunities of being in the playoffs have been resurrected. So, Easter link. Anyway, Jesus is alive. The greatest ever miracle to ever take place, which was the resurrection, took place today. Other religions may serve a dead God, but our God is truly alive and kicking. More than ever do we need his love. To get this big gig and to be sharing on Easter Sunday is such an honour. I've recently got back from Spring Harvest, where the theme was No Greater Story, which includes an incredible book by Leon Evans, all about taking our place in the great adventure of God. And that all starts from the resurrection. But let's rewind to the beginning of the Easter story, to Good Friday, to the death of Jesus. What needs to die in your life so that the resurrection can take place? The song by Elevation Worship paints this picture so well. God turns our graves into gardens. So before I get into more of my song, you won't get this at St. Paul's Cathedral. I bought my ukulele, and I'm going to quickly play part of Graves into Gardens on my ukulele. But do you know where you're reading it like it says Graves into Gardens acoustic version? This is Graves into Gardens autistic version. It's normal, but slower. You will have recorded me.
Come on, Liam.
I searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. Man's empty praise and treasures that fade are never enough. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. Love, there's nothing is better than you. That'll do for that. So I know over the last year or so, and I didn't know we were going to get this news today, a fair amount of our church family has lost someone. But with Jesus, death does not have the final word. Someone dying is not the end of the story. Like if you look at a plant, it's dead. And no matter how much you try and revive it, it's still dead. But may we stay connected to God and truly learn what it means to be alive. May we remember my 3 points, which with a speech impediment I'm tormenting myself, for 3 R's. Jesus rescues us from our mess. He restores us into something beautiful. Then he resurrects our hopes and dreams. So he rescues, restores and resurrects us. Another thing, which if we truly want to see the church thriving, which needs to die, is us feeling like we have to do it in our own strength or doing things with the power dynamics of the world, rather than like Jesus, who rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. So, we're into the final part of our series, Under Construction, about the church. And with everything that's happening in the world, especially around the war in Ukraine and the US and the myriad of other things, we need to establish a new order. And that starts with a thriving and alive church. I did put forget the Easter bunny, but Amy, don't forget your new bunny Dave. He's important. We need to become like Duracell bunnies, connected to the source of Jesus. And let's go for it. On the subject of Easter, we're going to do something this morning. different this morning. So different parts of my story and my reading are hidden all around the room. So you might find a little egg underneath your chair with a number on. When I tell you shortly that I want that number, I'd like you to read that part of my story out. So let's tell the story. So today we're in John 2. We find Jesus in a temple, a place we have heard lots about, and it being knocked down and rebuilt. And as I said, we need to fully grasp what it means to be part of God's church. So over there, I've got my temple, built of Jenga, and in a little while, Luke's got an important job. So I'm going to tell the story, but in a dramatic way. When it was the time of Passover, so around this time of year, Jesus went to Jerusalem. Someone go and find me first egg, and let's head to Jerusalem. Read me first egg out, Rich. What does it say?
When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem.
He did indeed. Then Jesus heads to the temple and finds people selling some sheep. Let's have some sheep noises. Bah! Bah! And some dove noises. Someone go and find me second egg. Who's got number 2? Can you read it out, Chris?
In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves.
Then Jesus gets angry and he turns over the tables. I won't recreate that bit, but imagine Jesus a bit like the Incredible Hulk. Jesus then says, "Stop turning my house into a market." And the disciples say, "Remember what Jesus said." Find my third egg, someone, and read out. What did Jesus say?
Stop turning my Father's house into a market.
The Jews then respond. And how did they respond? Let's find the next egg. Who's got number 4?
What sign can you show us to show us your authority?
Then Jesus responds and says, "Destroy the temple. Come on, Luke, knock down my temple."
Quick, Luke! Quick, quick!
Oh, there he is.
Hey! He then says he will rebuild it in 3 days, which gets us to Easter Sunday. But what does he do? Then the Jews are confused. Why are they confused? Let's find the next egg.
The Jews replied, "It took 46 years. How are you going to raise it in 3 days?"
The temple Jesus spoke about was his body. Let's find the final egg.
But the temple he spoke of was his body.
Hey! Woo! So, if I was to give my sermon my own little title, it would be New World Order, because cultural experts, such as the Rebuilders podcast, are saying with the rise of populism, we are heading into a new cultural order. And I want to suggest that as a church, we need to pivot and do likewise. An awesome podcast looking at church culture and how we have healthy churches is the Becoming podcast from Spring Harvest, where they speak to people who were in the church abuse scandals in the States and what we can do to build a healthy church. As we look at what rebuilding the temple looks like and centering on Jesus, that starts by creating a Jesus-centered culture of love. So let's quickly jump into my passage and what jumps out. Verse 13. When it was Passover, Jesus went to Jerusalem, as we learned last week, on a donkey. And this was around the Jewish festival of Passover. The Jews still celebrate this festival by having a Passover meal, something I did at Bible college. And verse 14. So the temple was supposed to be holy and a place of worship. But God goes into there and they're selling sheep and doves. And others are there counting money. Let's pause and ask ourselves a question. Not to this extent, but how often does church become about us and a product and not about worshipping the main thing, which is Jesus? Then we see Jesus get angry. And you might think anger doesn't seem like a fruit or character of Jesus. But this was righteous anger. It's where we get passion from. We wouldn't see justice and see situations changed for the better, like human trafficking and slavery, if it wasn't for people who felt a sense of righteous anger and a yearning for justice. One of my favourite verses, zeal for my house will consume me. May a passion for God's church consume everything we do as people of God. But let's look at this closely. This isn't saying protect the building. The Greek word for church is ecclesia, which means gathered people. It's all about the people and not about the steeple. It's a Christian cliche, but we are the church. So let's get ready to be the church. What the world needs right now is a thriving church, and Redeemer King is going to be a part of that. Then we have the verse which brings us today, Easter Sunday, also known as Resurrection Sunday. Jesus talks about destroying the temple and bringing it back in 3 days. And the Jews thought this meant the actual temple, and they thought it took 46 years to build. How would Jesus restore it so quickly? But you see, like a lot of things, how the Jews saw it wasn't the point God was making. The temple Jesus was talking about was his body. And of course, we've read to the end of the story. We know what happens. Jesus is alive. What I want to say today, straight off the bat, is resurrection isn't something which we pick up today and don't think about for the rest of the year. Having a firm understanding of the resurrection changes everything. It is the greatest miracle ever. May we never lose the wonder of it. When people die, they're supposed to stay dead. But Jesus says, no way, Jose. What separates Jesus from all the other many gods is he is still alive. As we are products of the scientific age, it can be hard in the Western world to understand the resurrection. But when we become Christians, our brain doesn't have to go out the window. Science and Christianity can coexist, and I've got an exciting story about that shortly. There is so much evidence to show that the resurrection changes everything. And knowing we serve an alive God who can resurrect parts of our life which need resurrecting. The same power which rose Christ from the dead lives in us. So if that is the case, and church is about the people and not about the steeple, we need to become a church without walls. And that brings me to a few of my recent adventures. So middle of March, I travelled to the Dominican Republic to get on a cruise boat and see my sister, who sends her love to everyone, who is absolutely smashing it as an entertainment host, doing quizzes and knit and natter, and also she did an incredible cabaret. 45 minutes of her singing, chilled music, which was absolutely magical. But the Jesus story on the boat was, because we had so many sea days travelling across the Atlantic Ocean, there was an opportunity to join a choir, which was led by two wonderful guys called Richard and Laurent, who have sang with the Kingdom Choir. So the choir was of a gospel bent, and I think it was either session 1 or session 2. Richard mentions he's a Christian pastor and a prison chaplain in Birmingham. So after I'd done something else, I think it might have been carpet bowls or something, I went to my cabin and knocked on the door, and my parents weren't in, or I thought they weren't in. They'd just not heard me, they were on the balcony. So, and I felt a sense that I needed to, at some point when I next saw Richard, tell him that I was a Christian. So I go up to the open deck to try and find him, and Richard's there having some food. And I felt that I should tell him my story and that I was a Christian. So I told Richard I'm a Christian. This is where God was at work, because it turns out that Richard studied at the same Bible college as me. 10 years after me, so he knows all my lecturers and my friends, which is just amazing. Where I truly saw a church without walls on the boat was, so because Richard and Laurent were Christians, and there was also a guest speaker there, Lindsay Murray, who was a biologist, but in one of his early talks he mentioned theology and God, and I thought he might be a Christian, So that does show science and faith can coexist. So we had these three Christians who got together and thought, we're on a boat, let's do church. So on the Sunday, in the Squid and Anchor, which was a pub at sea, we had church. Gospel church, with lots of vibrant music and songs. It was awesome. What was even more awesome, Sophie could worship with us, which is the first time she's been able to do a worship service in over 4 months. This was also the case with a party band, who are also our party band full coverage, who were so emotional because they could spend time in worship. And it was such a wonderful atmosphere. We had such a range of people there. There were some pastors on board, people who'd walked away from faith, seekers, all sorts. I think all churches could learn from that. And we also did it on Mother's Day. So I got to go to church with my mum on Mother's Day. So, on to my second adventure. I've just returned from Spring Harvest. Theme was the greatest story ever told. How we see God and how big we see him changes the whole story. Let's enlarge our perception of God and what he wants to do for us. As Craig Rochelle says, what we believe about God shapes our whole lives. So I was serving on the 8 to 11th team, and to be honest, I got there and I felt inadequate, as I was like, have I got the gifts, as I currently don't have many children under my care, but I trusted in God and believed he had called me to be there. So I was responsible for a small group of 14 8-year-olds out of a total venue of about 400 children. Just picture that for a second. 400 children worshipping and praising Jesus. It was such a magical and wonderful week. Also very loud, but brilliant. Our theme was stories and how we all have a Jesus story to tell. In stories, you always find a start, a middle, and an end. So we did scary starts, messy middles, and exciting endings. I wonder when you take an inventory of your life, how often you can trace all these components in your life. We had a church without walls moment. Well, it's a church without walls week, as it's at Butlins. But this was a Tuesday night, or it started for me on Tuesday afternoon, when I got asked if I'd help set up a wrestling ring. And I love wrestling. And the drama and theatrics of it all. And a wonderful guy called Gaz Thompson had set up the Kingdom Wrestlers, and they were there doing the after hours in our venue. So they decided, why not let's have our kids' session in a wrestling ring. Don't be afraid to think out of the box. As wrestling church, and telling the story of David and Goliath through wrestling, maybe the only way someone encounters Jesus. Some of our leaders learnt some moves. We did the worship in the ring. The whole night was awesome. Then on to probably the greatest moment and privilege of my life, bar none. On the Wednesday, we had a response time where children come to the side and be prayed for to become Christians and be filled with the Spirit. I was one of the people on the side praying, and 6 of my small group literally Usain Bolted it to me and gave their lives to Jesus. And I'm very emotional because we had 120 children that night change the course of their lives and start telling their own Jesus story. And then it's been another 180 this last week in Minehead. Then on the same evening, I went to the later celebration where Rick Warren preached via video due to some illness he's going through. And I had a punch in the gut and a warmth in the stomach. I knew I had to respond. So I went up, and the guy who prayed for me said, I feel like God wants to bring joy out of you, and you will start to feel sick. Sure enough, I did feel sick, and I had a real yearning in my stomach, and I just started laughing. This is, of course, also really exciting, as we look at things like missional discipleship and advance. But on to Thursday at Spring Harvest, we felt called to do another response time, where another 50 became followers of Jesus. So that's 117 lives completely transformed, and that included another 7 for my little group. So that was 13 out of 14 of my small group became Christians. One of the girls was going home, and her mum came up to me and said she's had an incredible week and was saying how great a leader I'd been, and I should be really proud of myself. This was then shared on Spring Harvest social media. So for someone who struggles with confidence, and at the beginning of the week, it was really touching. I tell these stories not because I'm great. I'm just an ordinary man from Chesterfield. But I serve an extraordinary God who is well and truly alive. There seems to be a real hunger for God, which has been exhibited by the work of a Bible Society and a report called The Quiet Revival, and another podcast called The Surprising Rebirth of a Revival in God, where it charts the fact atheism is dying, and prominent atheists such as Richard Dawkins and Aisha Ali are becoming Christians, or at least going on a journey towards Christianity. The founder of Wikipedia is on his own faith journey. And I'm now going to become the biblical Carol Vorderman, as they have recently, Bible Society, done some research. And Glenn Scrivener and the Speak Life podcast have done a brilliant video explaining these findings, so I'm going to share a few numbers. You can find the full report on the Bible Society website, but due to time, I'm just focusing on highlights. 15 years ago, secularism was on the rise. There were plastering messages on buses saying there's probably no God, stop worrying and enjoy life. 15 years and atheism seems to be crumbling. And the spiritual temperature is seriously changing. As Glenn Scrivener says, the secular story is the myth. The Christian story is the reality. So the Bible Society have compared data from 2018 with now. So this data shows 10 incredible shifts from 2018 to now. The church has gone from shrinking to growing. Church attendance has gone from 8% to 12% of UK adults. So for those who say the church is declining, tell them that's that. The second shift is church going in 18 to 24-year-olds has gone from 4% to 16%. 84% of people become Christians before the age of 18. So the younger generation and children's ministry is imperative to a thriving church. A third of adult churchgoers is now 18 to 24. 51% of 18 to 24-year-olds say they have took part in some sort of spiritual practice, which is compared to 42% of people 25 plus. 37% of 18 to 24-year-olds are interested in reading the Bible. In 2018, 4% of men 18 to 24 went to church. Now it's up to 24%. Both the attendance of men and women has increased, now up to 10% of women and 13% of men are going to church. 32% of church goers under 55 are from a non-white background. 47% of black people 18 to 24 are attending church. So there is a shift to a more diverse church, which I believe is what is intended. The next shift is we have moved from just ticking Christianity on a census box to actively participating. More people are attending church than ticking the Christian box. This shows a shift from nominalism to participation, and that is incredibly exciting. This is incredibly comforting for us as a church who centres itself around community. We are shifting from individualism to community. 63% of 18 to 34-year-olds say they feel closer to people in their local area compared to 25% of non-churchgoers. The data also showed 57% of churchgoers give to charity, whereas only 27% of non-churchgoers give. This shows as a churchgoer you are more likely to play an active role in society and actually be a world changer. That's incredibly exciting. We are shifting from anxiety to peace. 75% of churchgoers say they have meaning in life, compared to 49% of non-churchgoers. 69% of churchgoers say they are hopeful for their future, compared to 46% of non-churchgoers. 44% of churchgoers at 18 to 34 say they feel anxious, compared to 56% of non-churchgoers. Anxiety is still too high, and let's hope this quiet revival starts to shift things even more. The final shift, which ties everything together, is we are moving from a secular myth to a religious reality. The data The stuff in the secular story won't bring you happiness or fulfillment, but Jesus will. 34% of young people have said they will come to church if a friend invites them. So let's get out there and invite people. Christianity is still a minority, but things are heading in the right direction. God is resurrecting his church, and it's time for us to take action and keep sharing the incredible good news of hope and meaning, which only comes from Jesus. The news in the world wants us to believe it's all doom and gloom, and there is no hope. But there is hope, and his name is Jesus, who is well and truly alive, and stronger than anything else. This is a time to take action and go out there and share our faith, as the fields are white for harvest. The same power that rose Christ from the dead lives in you. So let's be filled with that incredible Spirit of God. See him move and do incredible things. So, as I start to come to a close, I hope you feel excited by the stories and statistics I have shared, and that Jesus and his church are well and truly alive. But until 100% of the world are Christian, our work will never be finished. So it's not the time to rest on our laurels. You may be listening today thinking, I've tried other things in life to find meaning, but nothing has worked. If you want hope and purpose and life in abundance, choose Jesus. Find someone to talk to today, pray, and start your own Jesus story. I'm going to pray now to close. Dear Lord, I want to thank you that you are good. I want to thank you that you are well and truly alive. And I just pray for everybody in this room, whether or not they've gave their lives to Christ before, or they're on a journey and want to recommit. I pray, God, that you start people back on that journey of following you. May we all tell an incredible Jesus story of adventure. May we all be filled afresh with your Spirit to go out there and change the world, bringing hope to this dark world. In your mighty name, amen.
Amen.